Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are on day 2 of our Jumpstart series here at Ardoq, and it is great to see attendees dialing in from across the world. If you are in a particularly cold part of the world today, you have my sympathy and solidarity. I'm in New York City and it is minus 12 degrees Celsius. You really do feel alive when that wind hits you. Welcome to EA Jumpstart 2025. You may have joined our fabulous first session with Monica and Sean yesterday. That was focused on moving IT from cost center to value driver, and we are just as excited about day 2. My name is Joy Dempsey, and I am delighted to be your host during today's session, where we'll be focused on how to lay the foundation for AI success with integration management. But first, we have a warm-up quiz for you, our audience. The poll should be on your screen or coming onto your screens right away. And we want to know, who are you? Who's dialing in today? What is your job title? Let's see if you're in the right place. As suspected, we've got nearly 2/3 of the audience have a role focused on enterprise architecture. Not a surprise, that's great to see. Solutions architecture, that's a big chunk there, 16% of our audience members clicking that. IT management, business analysis, and then we've got a mysterious other there. Well, welcome, no matter what your role is, we're really pleased to have you join the session today. I'm delighted also to welcome the absolutely brilliant James Tomkins to the virtual stage today. You are in capable hands with James. We're very fortunate to have James here at Ardoq as a senior enterprise architect, bringing over 20 years of experience from across both the private and public sectors. James's insights into managing complex IT environments are invaluable, and he'll be giving you a practical look at how to get real results fast. Before we get started, we will be launching, as you've already seen, a few polls during today's session, just as we did yesterday, and we were so pleased yesterday with the engagement. So again, today we encourage questions throughout, and we'll seek to answer live. We actually have our colleague Pierre, integration lead for Ardoq, monitoring the chat backstage for today's session specifically. So please do take advantage of that. If for some reason we are unable to answer live, we will get back to you following the event. And today's event, as are all the sessions, are being recorded. And we've got 3 resources loaded up in the interface that you can download. We've also got the full lineup for you coming onto your screens shortly. We go to the next slide. Oh, we may not have the full lineup for you, but we do have a week packed. There it is. We've got a week packed with valuable insights to help you kickstart your EA initiatives for the new year. And I know that many of you joined the first session yesterday. If you miss any sessions, again, you can reach out to us. Please reach out to us and get those recordings. As you can see, each day focuses on a different critical area of enterprise architecture, providing you with a comprehensive toolkit, playbooks, guidance, and downloadable out-of-the-box Ardoq solutions to tackle your biggest challenges. Right, I think we should go to the expert. James, good afternoon. Are we ready to go?
Yep, I think so. Fingers crossed if everyone can hear me.
Brilliant. I can hear you perfectly. The floor is all yours.
Excellent. Thanks, Joy. That's great. So yeah, welcome everybody. We're going to be looking at application integration management. And for those that were able to join the Jumpstart webinar yesterday with Sean, who was looking at application portfolio management, this very much builds on that as answers to the questions of what do I do with all my applications in my portfolio now I've got them? How do they all connect? And obviously Ardoq being based on a graph database is absolutely ideal for mapping and visualizing those linkages between applications, and we'll be getting a bit deeper into that as we move through into the demo. But I'm going to pull out kind of 3 challenges in particular just at the start that we're going to look at and cover. One is kind of the impact challenge. So when you've got a lot of applications in your portfolio, hopefully from following Sean's lead from yesterday, the question then comes, how do they interact? What is the impact of those? If one of those is impacted, say, by an operational incident, what else might I need to worry about? Where does that connect to? If I'm planning a project, I'm going to replace an application or maybe completely transform a business area with numerous applications in it. What does my scope need to be? What are my dependencies? If I'm looking at a solution architecture, perhaps, when I'm looking at changing an application, where do I also need to look at where development might need to occur? As well as kind of the risk of unintended impacts, even when like we're looking at changing an application, there are often sort of unforeseen ramifications of change within the IT environment. So being able to see connections, being able to see dependencies, and being able to look at what might be impacted, even if I don't imagine it's going to be, just so that you can kind of give some warning and manage some of the risk involved in particular changes. So there's a real challenge there around impact, which a lot of organizations struggle to deal with at the moment through a lack of transparency into their application environment and into integrations in particular. The second challenge I want to look at is around the ownership challenge, and this is an extension of what would have come out of the application portfolio management as well. That even if you can kind of see your application and your integration estate without a sort of sense of ownership of it, it's very, very difficult to take control of that environment, be it either ownership at an equivalent kind of application owner type role, but for integrations, or perhaps more specifically for expertise, understanding who has knowledge of those integrations, being able to identify where you might have single points of expertise, or even the points of no expertise at all, where integrations have maybe been around for a long time and some of that knowledge has left the organization or just been decayed over time. So we're looking at that kind of ownership model as a bit of a foundation for being able to do things like effective lifecycle management related to your applications. Very, very difficult to lifecycle an application, even upgrade an application, if it has impact on interfaces and integrations that you're not able to fully support. So we're going to look at that ownership challenge as well. And then the third challenge we're going to look at is that around governance. So you may well have a sort of a fairly complex integration environment. In there, there'll be some really good examples of well-managed, well-maintained interfaces, but there may well be other interfaces where either you don't have any expertise, or maybe it's just built on a technology you're looking to retire. So you can do things, having this kind of level of control, level of transparency, lets you operate in a more strategic way across your IT integration landscape. So you might be looking at the number of perhaps integrations you've got based on legacy protocols, maybe looking at SOAP versus REST interfaces and having a technology strategy that looks to increase the number of REST-based integrations and remove some of the more legacy SOAP-based integrations, things like that. That's something that you can look to do once you've established kind of a level of transparency and a level of control over your environment. And that's before we get to things like data-centric governance, like GDPR, being able to see what data is flowing through those integrations and what kinds of compliance and governance considerations might be associated with that data. So those are some of the challenges we're going to be looking at. So I'm going to be looking at this through the lens of the Ardoq provided application integration management solution. And there's kind of, again, three aspects of that solution that I'd really like to pull out before we dive into the demo, and I can start to show you that in practice. So the first one is the ability to model and analyze your integrations. So I kind of almost want to issue a bit of a warning in this sense. So within the solution, Ardoq have looked to sort of optimize to find the right balance between the level of detail provided in your integrations and the level of sort of useful insight that can generate. We're looking for that sort of Goldilocks level of data management. But one of the joys of Ardoq is that is flexible, and lots of people like to be able to model their applications in different ways. And Ardoq obviously comes with that flexibility to extend that model if you need to. But the solution comes preceded with the sort of the Ardoq EA best practice guide to how to model those integrations. And there's a bit of a word of caution there, is that this is a bit of a rabbit hole that EAs over the years have disappeared down, of trying to find the perfect model. How exactly do I manage my integrations? And there's very rarely a one size fits all approach to all of the different types of integrations, be it SaaS to SaaS or microservice to microservice. These things are potentially modeled in different ways. So there's a bit of a caution. One of the joys of going with the Ardoq solution is that it enables you to not disappear down that rabbit hole of trying to find the perfect model before you even get started. And the analysis there is what's provided with the solution is a range of analytical tools that lets you ask questions of your data that just wouldn't be possible from diagrams. Quite often when you look at application integration, what you see in organizations is some fairly hefty kind of Visio diagrams or lucid chart diagrams, which, whilst communicating the fact that your IT estate is very complicated, it's often very, very difficult to drive any further insight out of, and you're not able to really ask questions of those diagrams to gain real insight into your landscape. So one of the things we'll be looking at as well is what analysis we can bring to bear on that data to drive real transparency into your IT estate and your application integrations. Second level is around ownership and the level of control over your estate that you're able to exercise, because it's very, very difficult to evolve your applications if you can't evolve interfaces. And what you might find is that you end up only being able to move at the speed of your slowest interface. If in order to be able to upgrade, you have to upgrade all of the associated impacts, and one of those nobody understands or nobody even knew existed perhaps before you started the upgrade process in a worst case scenario, that can really slow you down and drive a real wedge into your application lifecycle management approach. Or if it doesn't slow you down, what often you find is, in order to avoid it slowing you down, is that you often create some technical debt there to sort of create wrappers to hide bad integrations, and your IT estate expands with these kind of tactical solutions to help you get around the fact that you're not able to manage some of the integrations that you've found in your estate. So we'll be looking at that ownership picture and the mechanisms that the Ardoq solution provides for helping you tackle that challenge. The third element I'm going to be looking at is that ability to govern and drive change. So once you've established a level of transparency into your estate, you're able to see what your integrations are. You've got a level of ownership that lets you be able to actually change and engage with those integrations. Then you can actually start to identify your risks and take action. So you may be able to identify a level of legacy technology in your estate. Is that a priority? Is it in an area where actually it's not hurting you that much, and there are other more pressing priorities that you need to be addressing? Is your estate ready for things like AI initiatives? Do you understand where your data is and where you might need to get data from in order to be able to make those successful? Or are you compliant, looking at things like ISO 27001, ISO 9001, or GDPR? Do you understand? Do you have enough transparency into your estate to be able to understand how you're able to respond to those challenges? So those are some of the elements we're going to be picking out in the demo. And I think with the next click, I will begin to move into the demo. So this is always the riskiest part of proceedings as we look to move from one window to another. So I'm about to move into Ardoq itself, and hopefully everybody can now see Ardoq. Joy, is that good?
Perfect.
Just checking. Excellent. Good stuff. Right. We're now in Ardoq. And what I want to start out by showing you is where, if hopefully off the back of today, you're duly inspired to go and start the process of undertaking application integration management, how you might do that within Ardoq. So we can go off to the Ardoq solutions library here, which is where all of the Ardoq solutions are held. And in here you can see the long list of Ardoq solutions that are provided free of charge within the tool. I'm just going to select application integration management there, and you can see what you're going to be getting if you choose to download it. So you've got a lot of documentation here to help guide you through the process that I'm going to be walking you through in a moment. And you can also see the meta model down towards the bottom of the screen. Scroll down. There we go. These are the component types and relationships that will be created with the AIM solution. And I'm just going to call it the AIM solution from now on, just because saying application integration management every single time is quite tiring. So I'll say AIM from now on, but I'll slip it in full again a few times just so nobody gets lost. But yeah, within the AIM solution, these are the component types and reference types that are provided. I'd probably draw your attention in particular to the interface component here, which is pretty critical and pivotal to application integration management, and the connect to relationship, which also underpins a lot of that. So that component type and that reference type are really critical to this. Some of the other component types there, If you've already implemented other Ardoq solutions, say, for example, you've already done application lifecycle management, then you'll see that some of these component types will already exist. And so this is just looking at the additional component types that you might now use to do AIM. We can also take a look at all of the Ardoq provided assets. So these are pre-configured assets that are provided as part of the solution, covering dashboards, viewpoints, presentations, surveys, and we'll delve into some of those in a bit more depth in a minute. But to install all of this, all you need to do is click that button in the top right, and you're up and running. So in custom with all good demos, I'm going to start with one I prepared earlier. And this is a kind of high-level application landscape, which looks incredibly tiny and perhaps look like some of the diagrams that you might see have been created within your organizations in things like Visio or Lucidchart, and often you flash them up in front of a C-suite person just to convince them of how complicated and difficult your estate is to manage. But here we see some real differences between what you can extract from those diagrams from what you can extract from Ardoq and data-driven visualization. So if we zoom in here, we can see, if we just pick out maybe Kafka here for a minute, we can see the different connections it has. And we're just using it at this level, a very, very simple application connects to application. But we can drill down into this. And if we expand out these relationships and then zoom in on Kafka again, we now get a whole new level of detail. So we can see the different interfaces that Kafka is providing in here, 2 different event topics, one for sales information, one for customer information. And we can sort of use this view to drill down and look at much more detailed information. So for those accessing Kafka, which of those are just accessing the customer topic, which accessing the sales topic? So we can immediately extract much more information and see that much more easily. We collapse that back down again. There we go. And the other thing we can do when we start to look at landscapes and using a data-driven landscape is that we can then start to layer information on top of that. So here we've got a heat map diagram. I'll just bring up the legend so we can see what that's showing. So we're looking at the kind of strategic fit of some of our integration protocols. So we're looking at REST being green. We've got some ambers and some reds in there, and we can immediately zoom in and see areas of good practice here where we've got RESTful integrations between Ardoq and some of Ardoq's data providers. But we've got other areas such as the Oracle data warehouse up here, where we've got perhaps more legacy protocols, either JMS or probably JMS in that instance. So we can immediately start to see, where are the hotspots in our integration environment? Where might we want to look for either further risk assessment or to find more information? On top of integration protocols, we can also start to layer on things like data. So if we pick out, where's a good one? Just have a bit of a scan around, we can see all of the, if we look at SAP, that's always a perennial one to pick on. So if we look at SAP here for a moment, we can see all of the different connections that our SAP ERP system has. And we can see that across some of them, we're able to indicate the data that's being passed back and forth over those interfaces. And if I zoom in just to declutter that diagram a bit, we can see sort of all the connections that SAP ERP has, we've managed to capture the data for some of those. Particularly to our customer payment portal, we can see we're passing customer information, cell phone number, and various things there. Now, this information is aggregated from kind of lower level data information, which if we zoom in, we can then start to see individual data entities. We can see in the key here, these are our data entities, and we've got the customer data entity here, which if we highlight, we can see all of the different systems that are using that customer information. And we can declutter this diagram slightly by zooming in and focusing on the customer data to see exactly which systems are consuming it and where it's going. So this is really, really helpful if you're looking at, if you're the data information owner for customer information, maybe you own the CRM, but you're aware that lots of other applications are reading customer data, but you don't know what happens to it after that, then this is a really great way of seeing where your data ends up, and therefore what governance, what policies might need to be in place on other applications beyond just your CRM to help manage and look after customer data in the way that it needs to. And we've been using block diagrams here, but another really great way of looking at this data is as a dependency map. And perhaps if we scroll down to, here we go, the customer payment portal. If I can get it in the middle of the screen, there we go. We can see here for each application, we've got the interfaces that it offers. We've got the data it provides via that interface. We can see which interfaces it connects to and the applications that are offering those interfaces. So a single application level, and again, if we want to just declutter this, we can zoom in on a single application if we want for clarity. We can see on an application basis exactly what its dependencies are, which data it's using, which data it's consuming from other applications, and get a good idea of the dependencies of it. And again, you can turn that on its head like we did in the other diagram and see that from a data perspective. So here we can look at it from our customer data perspective and look at which applications are consuming that, as we did with the block diagram. Again, we can just drill down into that to make that a little bit clearer. So we can come at it from the application level or the data level, and you can see which data is flowing where through which integrations and between which applications. Now, you probably saw on that previous diagram, in fact, if I go back to it, you can see that our data isn't complete here. We've got some applications that don't have any interfaces defined. We've got interfaces which haven't specified data. So you need to get a kind of a picture across the board of what your data completeness is like. And Ardoq provides, as part of the AIM solution, a set of dashboards to help you gain that view. So here we can see we've got a list of our total applications, how many integrations we've got, how many interfaces are defined, and interfaces requiring review. I'm not going to focus too much in this demo on things like lifecycle management or cost management for interfaces, all of which are managed and available via the dashboards, but they also can be implemented as part of separate lifecycle management and cost management solutions. So I'm not going to go into those too much today. But you can see here, we've got a view into our integration environment, and we can see that there's some big gaps in it. We've got a lot of not sets in our estate there. So now we can start to look at how do we go about addressing some of those gaps? How do we start to fill some of those in? So we can perhaps see I'm going to pick on integration owners and experts as a really useful next step, because I've said once you've got a bit of transparency, the next thing you need to be able to do really is drive a bit of insight into your environment. So what I'm going to do is just show you some of the approaches that you can use within Ardoq to addressing some of the data gaps that you might experience. So if we drop out, I'm just going to pop into some surveys, which some of you may know are one of the Ardoq platform features that enables you to crowdsource information from key owners. So here we're going to be able to survey our application owners in order to be able to keep track of our integration. So these are surveys, they're just like online forms really, which you can email to targeted audiences like application owners so that they are able to maintain and manage information about their applications. And in this survey, what we're going to do is allow an application owner to come in and maintain information about the applications that they support. So these are the different integrations associated with an application. So in this example, I'm going to send this survey to the owner of my Ardoq application. Why not? And we know that Ardoq's recently launched an integration with Celonis as a process management tool. So our Ardoq owner within our company here has implemented that in order to be able to extract Celonis information. And we can see here that they're doing that through the intelligence API provided by Celonis. So we can create that as our integration between Ardoq and Celonis, and we can indicate whether that's a read or write relationship. We're just reading information from Celonis, and we can submit that. And then if I close that survey, we can drop into a viewpoint and we can see the impact that that's had. So again, viewpoints, these are kind of standard views, if you like, for being able to look at your application integration information. So I'm going to pop into the specific application integration map. We can look at Ardoq, open that up, and there we can see Celonis integration that we just created there, connecting to the intelligence API. And this is a really handy view for just getting another way of gaining that perspective on individual applications, looking at the connectivity that they have. And you can drill in from here if you want to, say ServiceNow, understand what the impact of that is. You can find the information about that application, so we can see all of the information about ServiceNow. And if you want to drill even further than that, you can open up an overview of that application. And then using that, you can drop into all the other different views that ServiceNow is featured in. If you want to find out when's it due to be life cycled, or where's it hosted, and is that important, you can drill into all that information from there as well. So I'll just close that one down. And if we skip back to our dashboard there, which we had at the beginning. There we go. We can see that our we've added an interface to our an integration to our list of integrations between Ardoq and Celonis. So that's now taken effect. And then if we dip back into, we were looking at the ownership model and the challenge around, sorry, that's the wrong picture. That's it. The ownership model and the expert model. And we can do something very, very similar to track our ability to do that as we did with the integrations. So Ardoq also provides a data governance dashboard to let you see kind of what your coverage is like, where you're lacking owners, where you're lacking experts, looking at the level of data completion on your integrations. And again, we can see here, we've got a very partial data set. And we can do something very similar to we did with mapping our integrations with our experts. So if we go into, drill down into this figure here, so we've got 39 interfaces without an expert. And we can see here that our intelligence API from Celonis is one of those. So again, we can hop back out into our surveys to find owners and experts. We launch this survey. Again, once we've got our application, we can use our application owners to source a lot of this information, or you can target it at whichever audience you think has the information that you need. We're going to go into an existing entry, find our intelligence API, and we can find out who's responsible for this. So we will add in some names. Submit that. There we go, and that information has now been populated, and that's immediately available as soon as we've captured that. So we can, again, drop down into our viewpoints, look at our application owners, find Celonis. And we can see Anna and Maria here as being the owners and experts in our interfaces, which is great. So that's immediately available. And then when we pop back to our dashboard, we can see the numbers reduced down from 39 to 38, and that's immediately reflected. Also on this dashboard, we've got interfaces, and rather than kind of show you the survey process again, I'm going to show you another way we might choose to collect some information. I'm just going to hop out into a module called Ardoq Discover. This is our kind of browsable Google-style interface for helping people access and manage data. So from this prompt, you can simply type in the name of the component that you're looking for. We're looking for the intelligence API. You can see all the information about your API summarized here and all the different ways you might want to view it. We'll just look at the default. And here we can see our API, our integration with Ardoq, our expert and our owner. But we don't have our interface protocol. So what we can do is update our details in here. Scroll down, you can update any of the information about the interface. I said costs, lifecycle management. I'm not going to go in depth into those today, but they're all available as well. And we're going to look at our REST interface, add that information in. And then if we drill down into our report here, we can see that the intelligence API is no longer missing that information. Go back to our open dashboard, and our numbers reduced by 1, and our RESTful proportion on our diagrams increased. So if we were looking to do a strategic move from SOAP to REST, we could track our progress pretty easily using this dashboard. So that was as far as I was going to go, but there's a small bonus. I think we've probably got time for a couple of minutes. I'll just dive into one of the things that we also want to show is the kind of standard integration patterns, if you like, that are supported within Ardoq. So there's just some examples in this presentation that you can access. which kind of shows you the different kind of request response style API integrations. I mean, probably fairly kind of typical integration pattern. We've got event messaging services where we can track who's reading, who's writing, as we've seen from Kafka topics or similar. We've got sort of fairly classic middleware example again, where we're using tools such as TIBCO as a kind of service bus here to act as an integration layer between our other business applications. The old classic FTP, which I'm sure most organizations have somewhere down in the depths, and the different kind of protocols. We've represented those. In this instance, we've represented it as an application, but there's no reason why you can't extend this to, if you want to visualize FTP as being based from a server, that's all possible. So you can manage that as an application, or if you are mapping things down at the server level, you can do that as infrastructure as well, should you wish. And the classic database integrations as well, which again, you can manage as applications or as data stores, or however you want to model databases, depending on the level of detail that's appropriate. And that's the end of the demo part. So I'm just going to flip back to the main presentation. Yeah, and talk very briefly about an organization, which is very good me showing you, but obviously I work for Ardoq, but it's great to be able to give a real customer success story around application integration management. See, those have been picking up and run with it. And Innovation Norway is our example in this case, where they were having real trouble manually tracking their integrations. It was really time consuming. It was very error prone. They didn't really have any real time visibility because it took so long. And they implemented Ardoq to automate the updates of their integration landscape by syncing with their live environment. And that enabled them to massively reduce the amount of manual effort involved with maintaining the integration data. It gave them much more near real-time insight into those integrations and improved their decision-making by giving far greater clarity of impact across their estate. So they harvested huge benefits from that, and that you can read more about this in our knowledge base. There's an article that describes what they did in detail, but it was quite clever. They were looking at inferring integrations, fusing access policies from their applications in their Azure estate, and through that they were able to automate up to 40% of their estate and save about 50% of the time they spent on managing those integrations. So that was a hugely impactful change for them. And so I've kind of highlighted AIM there, and if you were able to join for Sean yesterday, you'll have seen some of the other Ardoq solutions, and you probably saw in that drop-down list the largest range of EA solutions that are provided, and each of them features some of the elements that I've described there. So it comes with a pre-configured meta model, which is a huge accelerator, because this can be an area where a lot of EA teams get stuck, because the desire is to create the perfect model through fear of, if we don't get it right now, it's going to be expensive and hard to change in the future. So we have to get it right before we even start. But with solutions, you can basically accelerate all of that away, help you not get stuck in that meta model configuration phase, and you can customize it and configure it later if you need to. But effectively, a lot of that work's been done for you ahead of time. So, and that's for all of the solutions. Also provide out-of-the-box dashboards. So again, with a lot of meta models, there's maybe 10, 20% of the insights into your data are going to be really specific to your organization. But for things like application portfolio management, application integration management, a huge number of the insights are going to be fairly standardized in terms of what you want to see. You're going to be able to want to identify risk, cost, life cycle, all those kinds of impacts and dependencies. And we can provide dashboards that do that for you to save you having to do all of those for yourselves. Also provided is a huge range of best practice guides. So there's documentation on the why the solution looks how it does, on the what's implemented and what's included, as well as a lot of support for how to implement that and how to get value from the solution itself. So again, a lot of support for you in the implementation of that. And finally, the kind of dynamic element is not to be ignored. So we've seen how all of the visualizations were data-driven, and you can embed those in live presentations like the one I was using to drive some of those views. And you've got the freedom to customize any element of that. So again, hopefully you saw all of the solutions in there, but each of these is provided with every solution. And I think I'm going to hand over to Joy, as I think we're going to do a poll.
We are. Thank you so much, James. That was brilliant, incredibly informative, and I think really relevant given the questions that our audience have been asking and that Pierre and the team have been answering in almost real time, which is fab to see. So I think with the questions that have been coming in, we've earned a question for you, audience. You've seen how Ardoq simplifies application integration. What would you say that your biggest challenge is when it comes to managing integrations in your organization? We'd love for you to select one of the options in the poll. And James, I might ask for your perspective on some of the answers that come through. What I'm seeing here is lack of visibility into dependencies between applications. We've got 70% of those who are answering clicking that one. Our other options that we've posted here: difficulty managing integration ownership and governance. That's coming up as the second most popular answer so far. In third place, we've got high cost and inefficiency of maintaining integrations. Then we've got limited ability to adapt integrations for AI readiness and innovation as the fourth most popular answer. And then we've got other as the final answer coming through. James, what do you think of that lack of visibility into dependencies between applications coming up as quite clearly the most popular answer from the audience?
Yeah, I'd say that chimes pretty well with my experience. I think it's almost like that first hurdle really is, as I say, I think most organizations often when they're trying to sourcing application information can be relatively challenging unless you've got a half decent CMDB or managed list of applications, and then taking it that next step further, trying to gain visibility of the connections between them can be really difficult because often there isn't a system of record for that. And I'm going to talk a little bit in the closing slides about how you can tackle that issue. But I think that gaining that transparency, just that initial win, it's a really quite a high barrier to get over, and hence a lot of people I think living from Visio diagrams that got created at great expense, perhaps by one poor soul who got sent into the organization to go and map the terrain. But it's yeah, can be really difficult.
And when we think of EA day-to-day pain points more generally, would you say that's the one that you hear the most, or are there other pain points that come up?
Yeah, I think that one is basically having good quality data. And if you haven't already got good quality data in your organization, how do you create or able to source good enough data to help drive some of that insight and deliver some of that value? I think that is one of the real challenges. And yeah, I'll mention that in the slides ahead.
Thank you, James. I think there might have been talk of a second poll. I don't know if it's coming up. Let's give it a second. Otherwise, we might be moving to success criteria. No, we've got one more poll question for the audience. Which of these EA responsibilities do you find the most frustrating? So not having reliable data to answer business questions. James, I think that's the answer I would be giving, given what you've just said about reliable data. Getting business stakeholders to understand the power of EA. Is that one of the responsibilities that you find the most frustrating to our audience? Manually updating diagrams and presentations, getting IT and business stakeholders aligned. And we've also put in there visualizing business architecture.
Cool.
So,
I'm glad we didn't include all of the above because that would
yes, we haven't got all of the above.
That would have been the hands down winner, I suspect.
So far, we've got 35% of our audience members are answering getting business stakeholders to understand the power of EA. James, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think in terms of, that's probably the next big challenge. I think you've got your data, or you're looking to source your data, and then you're looking to gain insight and get value from it. And that is also where a lot of EA initiatives can really struggle sometimes. It's about creating those relationships with stakeholders so that they can see the value in what's happening and it's actually delivering value for them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well, as to how, you don't want to make any of those sort of absolute blockers. So how do you start to alleviate those blockers that some of those challenges can cause?
Yeah, and I think on that, you've got some success criteria or pitfalls to avoid for us.
Yeah, so clicking through, got some success criteria here, and I've picked two. There are many, and again, absolutely don't want to see these criteria as being hills to die on either. So you've got like a percentage of apps connected as being a good indicator of how your data's coming along and the level of coverage you've got in your estate, and the percentage of interfaces owned. So those perhaps indicators of those first two criteria around transparency. Have we got any insight into our estate? Are we actually able to visualize any of our integrations? And what level of control do we have over our environment? And it's really useful information to know that maybe 90% of your interfaces aren't owned. That can be really useful. So when you're starting to do risk assessments or think about the challenges you may face with initiatives and things like that, that's really useful information. And aiming at 100% is not necessarily the goal for those success criteria either. It's, it may well be that for many applications, the interfaces are very much an embedded part of the application, and you don't need any ownership or expertise beyond that of the application. But for other larger applications that may have, well, standalone integrations or complex interfaces or sophisticated APIs, you absolutely do need that expertise to be able to evolve and manage them successfully. So they're kind of indicative success criteria. In that if those are higher numbers, then you've probably got greater transparency and you've got greater control over your estate, but absolutely don't pursue them slavishly as goals because you absolutely don't need to. And to pick out 3 pitfalls to avoid, I think I've probably mentioned a few as we go along, but don't get stuck on perfection. Don't try and craft the perfect model, and that's why the solutions is a great place to start, because it gives you that as an accelerator, so you don't have to do all of that thinking from scratch. Also, don't wait until you've got all of your information or as much as you think you might possibly need before you start engaging with your stakeholders to drive value. It's amazing how even a really small amount of insight can be hugely valuable to stakeholders. And the stakeholders here I'm talking about are folks like solution architects working on specific new applications and not having any sight of what they might break or what their dependencies might be. They can get real value out of a relatively small data set in terms of what connects to what. Or project managers looking to scope initiatives and not really potentially realizing that if they're touching that part of the estate, maybe where else impact might occur. That sort of stuff is gold dust, which can drive huge cost into organizations through the use of business analysts and rework as these things sort of come out much too late in the day, often to be corrected in a solution design or in a project plan. So don't aim for perfection. Get a small amount of data, engage with your stakeholders, and encourage them to get value out of that as quickly as possible. We've got PMI, or too much information, as the second pitfall there again, which is, again, when you start with a blank sheet of paper, the temptation can be to try and model everything. Let's collect every bit of information about everything possible. But again, there's a real balance between what can be captured and what's useful. And again, this is another plea really to start engaging with stakeholders early and be driven by stakeholders. I do realize as a former chief architect that working with stakeholders can be challenging because they want to know everything, and they don't necessarily want to know what question they want to ask right now, but they want to be able to ask any question at all in the future. So there is a management of expectations that needs to go on there, because there may be some data that it might take you 18 months or even longer to be able to collect and manage that information in a suitable way. So you just need to be able to work with your stakeholders to say, well, here's what we can give you today. Here's what, maybe we can give you, but with some fairly hefty error bars attached. And here's what's going to take a bit longer to capture. Is it really important? Because what you don't want to do is spend 18 months capturing a data set that it turns out they didn't really need, or they just asked for it because they thought they should. So there's a real working with your stakeholders to understand exactly what the right level of information to capture is, based on kind of how easy is it to capture and manage that information versus how useful it is. Is it worth the investment to go above and beyond? Because people get application owners and everyone can get survey fatigue. So you only really want to be reaching out to them and asking you to help source some of the most valuable information. And then they can really see the impact of it, and it creates a virtuous cycle. So yeah, TMI, definitely a pitfall. And I feel a bit cruel putting this one in as a one-off data capture exercise being a pitfall. Often, that's where organizations will start. They'll already have undertaken an exercise of sending a small army of business analysts maybe out into the environment to try and create the the Visio diagram to end all Visio diagrams and things like that. And that can be a really good starting point. If that's your only data source, then hey, you use it, capture it, get it somewhere where it can be maintained in Ardoq, and then it can have a life, because otherwise diagrams age like fish. They go, they get very old very quickly, and no one can trust them because, well, how long ago was that created? Is that what's actually there now? But as a starting point, they could be okay. But again, I would urge you to plan the life cycle management of your data into how you manage that. So don't just upload your applications in a big spreadsheet and forget about them. Look at those surveys, understand how am I going to keep that information current, because it's currency, it's interactivity that is really going to drive the value for you. But like I say, I feel cruel because often it's where a lot of organizations will start, but you really have to look at how are you going to source that, ideally from automated integrations, like Innovation Norway did, either driven by their cloud environment, but if not through questionnaires and surveys, but really do think about the lifecycle management of your information, and don't see this as a one-off data capture information capture exercise. Cool. I'm just going to skip on. Oh, okay. I'm just going to step out and do some bigging up of Ardoq for 20 seconds, just because you absolutely need to know this. So in 2024, Ardoq was the only vendor to be named a leader in the Magic Quadrant and the customer's choice. And I think hopefully what you've seen from the demo and from what you've heard so far is that we are by far and away the most flexible and the most useful of the EA tools out there. And that's really reflected in this information. So it's not just me telling you this, it's Gartner as well. And skipping back to the solutions again, this isn't quite a pitfall, but if you like, this is why solutions are so powerful, because they're designed to help you avoid those pitfalls. And they're also designed to help you focus on the outcomes and the goals of your stakeholders. So EA for the sake of EA is a real anti-pattern. EA is for your organization, EA for the enterprise, EA for your stakeholders. Whether those needs are to how do we grow revenue, how do we reduce risk, how do we manage cost, the EA solutions that you can see within Ardoq are really about giving you that transparency to be able to identify risk and work to reduce them, help you get that transparency over cost and help to reduce that, and start to look at, what are the blockers that are going to prevent you from growing revenue? How might you, what are you going to need to do to be ready for AI initiatives or be ready for application transformation? What are the issues that are going to be involved? So it's all around, these solutions are all focused on the outcomes and the goals of your stakeholders. Again, that's where a lot of the value is baked into them. Just wanted to emphasize that. Cool. Getting towards the end now, nearly at the point where we can unleash the questions, but just wanted to flag some downloadable resources. I think they're under the resources tab in the Zoom. Most of these will be linked from, but they're also included here as well. There's some great how-to guides, how to get started. There's also, if you search in the knowledge base, it's not linked here, but it is in the knowledge base, is that Innovation Norway article. It's really fascinating reading, so definitely urge you to check that one out as well. And then final three thoughts, again, which is me hammering home the messages I've hopefully hammered home a bit already, which is, automate wherever possible. It is difficult because unlike applications, often you don't have as many systems of record that manage your interface and integration information. So there's a bit more of a crowdsourcing effort often needed. But where you can, do automate, because it will pay dividends. And again, crowdsource and use the surveys, use the mechanisms, use the sort of ease of use of Discover to help you gather that information, because again, you don't want to be sat there as an EA having to capture all of this. And automating it also helps bake in that data quality. You can keep it current. You can make sure it's coming from the people who are best cited of that data. So you can ensure data quality in a way that is difficult otherwise. Embed value. So again, this is about working with your stakeholders as early as possible. This kind of integration information is really valuable to so many different areas of the organization, be it the operational incidents sort of service desk type teams who need to look at impact, be it program management officers, project management officers who are needing to scope initiatives appropriately, or solution architects just looking for a bit of support and coming up with solution designs. There's a huge number of stakeholders to work with and a huge appetite for application integration information. So look to embed yourself in their processes as much as you can. Don't make them have to work hard to get that information. See if you can build that information into things like design reviews, perhaps for solution design. You can source a lot of integration, or certainly new integration information from solution design reviews, and you can feed that back to solution architects as valuable information for them as part of the design process. So where you can, become part of the process. And the final point really is just, it's all about building a strong foundation. So we've seen kind of APM being the first step to get hold of your applications, then be able to look at the connections between your applications. And again, that in itself also provides a bit of a foundation for solutions like data lineage, where you want to look in much more detail at the data flows through your organization, and prepare you for some of those AI initiatives or transformation efforts. So it's all about building a strong foundation. And the solutions that Ardoq offers build on each other to allow you to do that. So it's not about doing everything all at once. It's about taking things in a sensible progression. And I think that was the last thing I was going to say.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. We're up against time. Time is against us, but there were many great questions in the chat, but one of them that I think maybe we could get your 30-second perspective on to finish the session. AI readiness. Can you talk us through how the integration management affects AI readiness for an organization? I know it's a big question, but maybe your 30-second answer.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my 30-second answer would be, really, it's just about stepping stones of maturity. So obviously, there's a lot of issues involved with AI, things like trust, being able to understand where your data is coming from, and the quality of that data, because obviously a lot of organizations who kind of rushed into AI initiatives there's lots of high profile stories out there on the internet, some of them amusing, some of them less so, about, understanding where their data's come from and what the quality of that data is. So being able to see where your actual sort of sources of information is coming from. Are you taking data from that source, or are you getting it maybe second, third, fourth hand, where it's gone through other applications and other things have happened to it? It's more of a kind of, again, as a platform for data lineage, kind of baking some of that transparency into your environment so that you can see clearly where things have come from, and therefore what level of trust you can place on them, what management regimes are in place around those things, because maybe it's great now, but actually no one's even maintaining that. So it's kind of part of that providing that solid foundation for you to understand where your data is coming from before you kind of go too gung-ho into industrializing that for your customers or employees.
Brilliant. Oh, I'm so glad we got a chance to discuss that one live. 45 minutes isn't enough time. We're finishing up this session. As a reminder, all of these sessions are recorded. The resources tab, I know that my colleagues in the chat have shared where to access those. So if you do miss anything else this week, there'll be a recording or a resource that can get to you pretty easily. Thank you for all of your questions, audience. James, thank you so much for the overview and the demo. This was great, and looking forward to seeing you join us in future sessions. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.